When Kirk Frost was walking through the crowd, the chaos erupted, fans screamed, cameras flashed, and then a figure lunged at him, knocking him off balance. The energy shifted instantly from excitement to pure panic. Security rushed in, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. What happened in those few seconds left everyone stunned. Was this a random attack? Or was it something deeper and far more personal? And why now, just when rumors about Kirk's departure from love and hip-hop were already swirling? Fans are losing their minds over what's spreading across the internet. Some claim it was an unhinged fan seeking revenge, while others believe it was a calculated act of retaliation tied to behind-the-scenes drama. But the truth? Stay tuned, because what we're about to reveal changes everything. Kirk Frost has always been surrounded by drama. His entire career was built on it. But nothing could have prepared him for what went down that night. It was supposed to be just another public appearance, a normal night out. He had been keeping a low profile ever since the rumors about his love and hip-hop exit started making waves. Fans were talking, blogs were on fire, and everyone demanded answers. But Kirk stayed silent, a decision that might have been his biggest mistake. The venue was packed with industry insiders, influencers, and die-hard fans. Kirk moved through the crowd, playing it cool as always. Despite the controversies, his name still carried weight. He had loyal supporters, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Rashida had warned him earlier that day to be careful. People were upset with him. She told him his entire situation had stirred up emotions. But he brushed it off, assuming she was overreacting. In hindsight, maybe he should have listened. The first sign of trouble appeared when Kirk noticed a group of fans watching him too closely. At first, he didn't think much of it. He was used to people staring and whispering. It came with the territory. But something about this group was different. These weren't just fans. They were angry. He could see it in their faces. One of them, a man in his late 20s, had a look in his eyes that made Kirk uneasy, like something was about to go down. Then, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number popped up. "You can just walk away from this." Kirk frowned. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for someone watching him too closely. His instincts screamed that this wasn't just some online troll messing around. Something was very, very wrong. His heart began to race, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was a public event. Nothing could happen here. At least, that's what he told himself. As Kirk Frost greeted someone, his hands trembled slightly, but he played it cool, keeping up the unbothered reality star persona. Then, everything changed in an instant. The same man from the crowd suddenly broke through security. No shouting, no warning, just a violent blur of motion, a fist swinging fast, and before Kirk could react, pain exploded across his face. The crowd erupted into chaos. Security tackled the man to the ground, pinning him down as he thrashed and screamed. His voice finally cut through the madness. "You ruined everything. You lie, idiot." A chill ran through the crowd. This wasn't some random attack. This was personal. The attacker lunged again, still fighting to get to Kirk. His words drowned in the madness. Cameras flashed, fans screamed, and phones were already recording. Within minutes, this moment would be everywhere. Then, sirens. The police stormed in, pushing through the panicked crowd. The man kept screaming as they dragged him away, his voice desperate. "Tell them the truth, Kirk." And just like that, Rashida was by Kirk's side. Her face was tight with fear and fury, her voice urgent. But Kirk barely heard her. His heart pounded, his ears rang, and when he wiped his lip, his fingers came away stained with blood. The reality hit him all at once. This wasn't just an attack, it was a message. But from who and why? Police questioned witnesses as the attacker, still wild with rage, shouted his final warning before they shoved him into a squad car. "You can't hide forever, Kirk." Kirk and Rashida locked eyes. They both knew the truth. This wasn't the end, if anything. This was just the beginning. Later that night, Kirk sat in his car, his blood running cold. He had been in the industry long enough to know when something was just internet noise. This wasn't that. Someone had used a public attack to send their first warning. His phone buzzed nonstop. The footage was everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, gossip blogs. Millions of views were already racking up. But that wasn't what had Kirk on edge. His inbox was flooded with messages from burner accounts. And then, one message stopped him cold. "They're coming for you. You need to leave town." But this wasn't from a burner. This was from an old friend. Someone Kirk hadn't spoken to in years. His pulse thundered in his ears. This wasn't just any troll talking. This was someone who knew something. Someone close enough to the situation to send a real warning. Yes, Kirk had plenty of enemies in the industry. But this felt different. Rashida's voice snapped him back to reality. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her expression a mix of anger and worry. Kirk, we need to talk. She had been silent since the attack, but he had noticed her clutching something big. Kirk sighed, locking his phone, rubbing his aching jaw where the punch had landed. Go ahead, he muttered. Rashida didn't waste a second. Who was that man? She demanded. He knew you, Kirk. That wasn't just some crazy fan. What the hell is going on? Kirk exhaled and stared out the window. He wanted to dismiss it and tell her it was just some random prank, but he knew better. Rashida had been by his side for too long and had seen too much. I don't know, he admitted, but I have a bad feeling about this. Rashida shook her head and scoffed. Kirk, you just got attacked in front of the entire world. This isn't just a bad feeling, this is serious. And now you're getting messages telling you to leave town. Kirk hesitated before turning his phone around. Her eyes widened. You're still in contact with him. Kirk shook his head. No, I haven't spoken to him in years. Rashida exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel tighter. Kirk, you need to start talking because I'm telling you right now, I don't like where this is headed. Kirk leaned back in his seat, rubbing his hands over his face. He didn't know where to begin, but one thing was certain, this wasn't over. The next morning, Kirk woke up to absolute chaos. His phone had been buzzing all night, and now the headlines were everywhere. As he scrolled through the articles, he realized that while everyone was speculating, no one had real answers. The police hadn't released an official statement, and the attacker's identity was still unknown. But that didn't stop the internet from going wild with theories. Some claimed it was revenge, someone from Kirk's past coming back to settle a score. Others suggested it was a stalker fan who had taken their obsession way too far. But then, there were the darker theories. The ones that hit a little too close to home. The idea that this attack wasn't random at all. That someone wanted to send a message. Kirk's breath caught in his throat as he read through the comments. People were piecing things together too quickly, getting too close to the truth. Before he could process it all, his phone rang. Unknown number. His heart skipped a beat. For a split second, he considered ignoring it. But something told him he had to answer. Hello. His voice came out hoarse. Silence. Then, a deep, chilling voice came through the line. Calm. Too calm. You should have listened. Kirk's breath hitched. Who is this? The voice ignored his question. Did you really think there'd be no consequences? Kirk shuddered. I don't know what you're talking about. A slow, airy chuckle. Oh, you will? Soon enough. Click. The line went dead. Kirk stared at his phone, hands shaking. This was so much worse than he had imagined. This wasn't just an obsessed fan. Something from his past was coming back to haunt him. And the worst part? He had no idea who was pulling the strings. Later that afternoon, Kirk and Rashida sat across from the police. They had called him in, not as a suspect, but as a victim. They wanted to know if he recognized his attacker. If he had any enemies. If he had received threats before. Kirk kept his answers vague. He wasn't ready to reveal everything. Not yet, but something about the officers' expressions unsettled him. They knew more than they were letting on. And then one of them spoke. Mr. Frost, are you sure you don't want to tell us everything? One of the detectives flipped through a folder of documents before finally speaking. Your attacker's name is Jason Carter. Does that mean anything to you? Kirk's blood ran cold. Jason Carter. He hadn't heard that name in years. Rashida glanced at him, immediately sensing his reaction. Kirk, she whispered, but he couldn't speak. His mind was already racing with all the reasons why Jason was here. The detective studied Kirk's face carefully. He's not just some crazed fan, he continued. In fact, he's not involved in the love and hip-hop fandom at all. Kirk swallowed hard. Then what kind of connection does he have to me? Without a word, the detective slid a paper across the table. A mugshot. Jason Carter's face stared back at him. Older, rougher, but still recognizable. From what we can tell, the detective added, he blames you for it. Rashida gasped, covering her mouth. Kirk, what did you do? Kirk's chest tightened. Everything made sense now. This wasn't about love and hip-hop. It wasn't about his firing, and Jason Carter wasn't working alone. Kirk's fingers clenched into fists beneath the table. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Jason Carter's name brought back memories he had buried deep, ones he never thought would resurface. Rashida was still staring at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kirk, what did you do?" He shook his head, struggling for words, but the detective didn't flinch. "So, why don't you tell us what this is really about?" Kirk ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. He knew he had no choice. If Jason was back, then the past was no longer buried. The detective exchanged glances with his partner. Define bad. Kirk hesitated. His mind raced. How much should he say? How much could he say? Clearing his throat, he finally spoke. Jason got caught up in something illegal. I warned him, told him to get out. I tried to leave before it was too late, but his voice trailed off. When he finally met Rashida's eyes, she looked at him like she was begging for the truth. Jason and I were friends, years ago. We did business together, but things went bad. The detective nodded slowly, like he was putting the pieces together. And now, years later, he's out and coming for you. Kirk's stomach twisted. This wasn't just an old grudge. This wasn't some rivalry reignited. This was revenge. The interrogation room felt like it was closing in, but Kirk forced himself to focus. He needed answers. "Do you know where he is now?" the detective asked. Kirk's breath caught. Everything had fallen apart. Jason took the fall, and I didn't save him. He went to prison. And now he was back. After looking through a folder of documents, one of the detectives finally said, "Your attacker's name is Jason Carter. Does that name mean anything to you?" Kirk's blood ran cold. Jason Carter, he hadn't heard that name in years. Rashida shot him a concerned look, sensing his reaction, but Kirk was unable to speak. His mind was already racing with all the reasons why Jason was back. The detective carefully examined Kirk's background and discovered that he wasn't just some crazy fan. In fact, he wasn't involved in the love and hip-hop fandom at all. He leaned forward. "But he does have a connection to you." Kirk swallowed hard. "What kind of connection?" The detective slid a piece of paper across the table. A mugshot. Jason Carter's face stared back at him. He was older, but still recognizable. "And from what we can tell, he blames you for it." Rashida gasped, covering her mouth. "Kirk, what did you do?" His chest tightened, making it impossible to breathe. Everything suddenly made sense. This wasn't about love and hip-hop, wasn't about his firing. Jason Carter wasn't working alone. The detective's words made Kirk's fingers clench into fists beneath the table. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Jason Carter's name brought back memories Kirk had buried deep, memories he never thought would resurface. Rashida was still staring at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kirk, what did you do?" He swallowed hard, shaking his head. The detective didn't flinch. "So, why don't you tell us what it is?" Kirk ran a hand over his face and exhaled sharply. He had no choice now. Jason got caught up in something illegal. I warned him. I tried to get out before it was too late. He looked at Rashida, whose eyes begged for the truth. Jason and I were friends, years ago. We did business together. But things went bad. The detective nodded slowly, piecing everything together. And now, years later, he's out and coming for you. Kirk felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just a grudge. This wasn't just an old rivalry being reignited. This was revenge. The interrogation room felt oppressive, but Kirk forced himself to concentrate. He needed answers. "Do you know where he is now?" the detective asked. Kirk's voice was low. Everything fell apart. He was the one who took the fall. And I didn't save him either. He went to prison. The detective sighed. "We're trying to figure out what he's doing, but Mr. Frost, if he's truly after you, you need to be careful. Because if last night was just a warning." He shook his head. "The next time." Rashida inhaled sharply and gripped Kirk's arm. "We need to leave town." Kirk shook his head. "That's exactly what he wants. He wants me scared. He wants me running." His voice was firm. "I'm not giving him that." Rashida's voice broke. "Kirk, this isn't a game. This man tried to hurt you in public, and now he's sending you threats. What happens if he—" A sharp knock at the door cut her off. An officer entered with a phone. "Sir." The detective frowned, pressed play on a video, and Kirk and Rashida leaned in. Their blood ran cold. Security footage from the night before. A new angle. In the grainy black and white video, long before the attack, Jason Carter was seen lurking near the venue's entrance. But the worst part? He wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside him. Hooded, face hidden. The two men spoke for a brief moment before the hooded figure handed Jason something. A small object, barely visible. Kirk's stomach dropped. Pause it. Zoom in. The detective did. Kirk barely had time to react before he was out the door. Rashida was right behind him as they ran to the parking lot. Kirk fumbled for his keys, terror consuming him. If Jason had access to his office, that meant. He didn't even finish the thought before speeding down the road. Rashida's voice shook. A key to what? Kirk didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because he already knew. That key was to his office. The drive felt endless. But when they arrived at the building, Kirk's worst fear was realized. His office door was open, not kicked in, not forced. Just unlocked, as if someone had simply walked right in. Rashida grabbed the dashboard, frantic. Kirk, slow down. What if he's still in there? Kirk's hands tightened around the wheel. Then, I'll deal with him. But deep down, he wasn't sure what he'd find. The office was dark, eerily silent. Papers littered the desk, drawers left half open, as though someone had been searching for something. And then, he saw it, sitting dead center on his desk. A black envelope. Rashida gasped. What is that? Kirk swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. 4 words, written in red ink. This isn't over, Kirk. Rashida took a shaky step back. He was here. Kirk clenched his jaw, his mind spinning. Jason had broken in, gone through his belongings, left him a message. But what was he searching for? What was he planning to do next? Before Kirk could respond, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A chilling voice whispered, enjoy the memories, you should. Because soon, that's all you'll have left. The call disconnected. Kirk stood frozen, his breath shallow. Rashida clutched his arm, her face pale. It was clear now, Jason Carter wasn't just back for revenge. He was back to ruin Kirk's entire life. The office break-in, the cryptic message, the chilling phone call. Jason wasn't just sending threats. He was playing a game, and Kirk wasn't sure if he could win. Before he could respond, there was a sharp noise that broke the silence. A knock at the door made both of them freeze, and Rashida's grip tightened around Kirk's. Kirk took slow, measured steps toward the door, his pulse pounding in his ears as he reached for the knob. He hesitated for a moment before yanking it open. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty. But just as Kirk exhaled in relief, his eyes locked onto a small, unmarked package on the floor. His stomach churned. He took a step back, resisting the urge to touch it. But he couldn't ignore it. With careful fingers, he tore off the brown paper, revealing a single item inside, a USB drive. Kirk and Rashida exchanged a tense look before he moved to his laptop and plugged it in. His breath hitched as the screen flickered to life. A single video file appeared. No title, no description, just a timestamp from earlier that day. A cold dread settled in his chest as he hesitated for just a second before clicking on it. The video began playing. What they saw sent a chill down their spines. It was security footage of their house. Rashida gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Kirk's stomach twisted as he watched himself and Rashida leave earlier that day. And then, just moments after they had driven away, a figure stepped into the frame. Jason, he wasn't hiding. No mask, no shadows. He wanted them to see him. He walked right up to their front door and tried the handle. Locked. But instead of breaking in, he did something far more sinister. He turned to the camera, grinned, and leaned in. His lips moved, but there was no sound. Kirk's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. Can you read his lips? Rashida's voice was barely above a whisper. Kirk's throat tightened. He's saying, you should have let me in. A sickening realization dawned on them. Jason hadn't just broken into Kirk's office. He had been at their house, waiting, watching. Kirk slammed the laptop shut, his entire body rigid. We're leaving. Rashida immediately grabbed her bag. Where are we even supposed to go? Kirk's jaw clenched. Somewhere he won't find us. They hurried out of the office. Paranoid. Every step felt like they were being watched. As they got into the car and drove away, Kirk couldn't shake the eerie feeling that Jason was already 2 steps ahead. Rashida clutched her phone. "I'm calling the police." But before she could dial, her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. She slowly opened it. Her blood ran cold. It was a live photo of them, taken seconds ago. From inside their car, Rashida dropped the phone. Her voice was a strangled whisper. "He's here." Kirk's grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles turning white. His mind raced. How? Where? And then, a car slammed into them. Before Kirk could react, the impact sent them skidding across the road. Tires screeched. Rashida screamed as Kirk fought to control the car. His heart hammered in terror. Then, another hit, and another. Jason wasn't just following them. He was hunting them. Kirk yanked the wheel, trying to veer into a side street. But the other car was relentless. The final impact sent them spiraling out of control. Glass shattered, metal crunched, and then darkness. The first thing Kirk noticed was sirens. As he regained consciousness, his head ached and his vision was blurry. Rashida was slumped against the seat, groaning in pain. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his body. They were still in the car. But where was Jason? Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the wreckage. Officers rushed toward them, voices shouting. Paramedics swarmed them, checking their injuries. But Kirk wasn't listening. His eyes scanned the area. Jason was gone. Then he saw the detective from earlier. His face was grim. "Mr. Frost, you're lucky to be alive." Kirk's voice was hoarse. "Did you catch him?" The detective shook his head. "By the time we arrived, he was gone. But we'll find him." Kirk clenched his fists. He wanted to believe that. But deep down, he knew the truth. Jason wasn't finished, and the next time he returned, they might not survive.